Hello and welcome to Snide's Return, a tabletop roleplay podcast. My guest today put the quest into Equestria and is the perfect stablemate, no matter if he's going in any or no direction. He brings the essence of the toy box to the tabletop, one of the perks of being a renegade, when knowing is half the battle. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome back a game designer and TTRPG content creator who's taken a real shift up in productivity to help bring our imaginations to life. Thank you so much to the man making worlds collide, Mr. Ryan Costello. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back on the show, Adam, the man who crosses time zones, borders, and game systems to accommodate his guests. He always knows the right question to ask and when, and he is the master of the introduction.
That is so very kind to say. So less about me and more about you for those who haven't heard our previous interview. Brian, how did you get into tabletop role-playing games, please?
I got into tabletop role-playing games in high school. I was on a whale watching trip, and we needed some downtime between whales. And so one of my classmates introduced me to the idea of Dungeons & Dragons, which was in its second edition at the time, the advanced version. And we didn't have any rules. We didn't have any dice. So it was just focused on telling stories, creating a character, being in the moment. And that really got me hooked. And so when I came back from that trip, suddenly my social circle had changed. I started sitting at the gamers table instead of whoever the friends that I used to sit with were. And then over the years, it became a priority in my life to always have a game group going on. And this continued all the way up to 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons. And then around that time, podcasts became a thing and the internet was becoming a bigger deal. And fourth edition was announced. I was not super happy about it. So I decided I was going to get into podcasting, which is really what launched me from like a hobbyist to someone who really dedicates most of their life to role-playing games. When I launched the 3.5 Private Sanctuary, which became the No Direction Network, which is the internet's premium source, at least it has been for a few years, for Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews.
Very, very busy, very condensed, but each...
Yeah, that's about 10 years condensed.
Well, we have gone over that before, so if you want to delve more into Ryan's backstory, please listen to our previous interviews. It's down there, among other fantastic interviews we've done with other Essence 20 related content creators, so and so many others in the TTRPG community. Scroll down and follow those links. But that was then, and this is now. And to caveat, now this has been building as we mentioned before we started, with a backlog of COVID that is now caught up with where we are today. So where did your connection with the toy box turn into the tabletop role-playing game, and what has that meant to you, bringing you into the now?
Well, I can say that some of the earliest attempts to do any kind of design work was to create a GI Joe or GI Joe-like role-playing game. This goes back to high school. And I tried probably two different systems. One of them was basically just Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, but GI Joe. And that one didn't really catch on because I did not know how to balance anything. So like my PCs were getting wiped out by troopers after, hours of character creation. So that put a pin in that one. And then years later, I tried it again. And I was happier with that system, but never did anything with it. So then a few years ago when it was announced that finally this like holy grail property that I know a lot of people in the game industry have wanted to work on, like the Hasbro properties, not G.I. Joe specifically, but like G.I. Joe or Transformers or Power Rangers when they picked that up. When it was announced that Renegade had that license finally, had convinced Hasbro to license them out for tabletop role-playing games, I got involved as quickly as I could. I contacted everyone I knew that knew the people that were associated with Renegade and with the RPGs that they were putting together. Got a resume that included Hasbro employees, Wizards of the Coast employees, just anyone that I could get that would vouch for me. And I sent it off to Renegade and convinced them that not only was I a competent designer, but I was an expert on the source material, and that I had some social media reach that I could then say, like, all this stuff that I've done for Pathfinder, I could also do for whatever this new role-playing game is going to be. We didn't have a name at the time. And they liked it. They brought me on board.
Amazing. And the system that Renegade has used to create, as you say, these multiple IPs, is the Essence 20 system. So in broad brushstrokes, to sort of half elevator pitch and half because you love it and have worked extensively with it. What is the Essence 20 system?
The Essence 20 system is a light, skill based, story based, and action oriented, mostly action oriented. We also will talk about My Little Pony in a minute.
Mm.
Role playing system that has been the spine, that has been the engine that is running Power Rangers, GI Joe, Transformers, and now My Little Pony. The conflict resolution is very simple. You roll a d20 and you roll another die based on your competency in that skill. So the more skilled you are in it, the higher the die. You add them together. So the math never gets complicated. The character creation choices just up this die. And so when you're at the table, all you have to do is look at the character sheet and see what second die to roll. It's fun. It's fast. The skills are they dictate combat. They dictate out of combat. There's no like separation between combat and non-combat skills. And it's nice. It's fun. It's smooth. And the more that I design for it, the more I'm finding ways that I can express interesting ideas mechanically through this fairly straightforward, simple system.
Absolutely. And so at time of recording and sort of moving on to the future, so far we've had the sort of the trailblazer, as it were, for the system, the Power Rangers core rulebook and a few extra supplements for that. Transformers has recently come out, and Beacons for Hope with the GM screen. And one I have over my shoulder is the GI Joe core rulebook. And these are all available in PDF and hard copy and all these sorts of good things, along with the Emerald Oubliette, which is a word I just love to say. So with these adventures, you mentioned the skills are both in combat and out of combat. What has it been like to sort of, using the framework of the system, bring the characters that you do know so well, as we previously discussed, to the tables of people who have looked for these experiences, but maybe looked at other systems and maybe hacked them? So what's it been like sort of really giving that fan service, but core gameplay mechanic as well?
Well, I think probably the best and most flexible part of the system that allows me to add character to the characters that we're adapting is the specialization, because we've got a set number of skills but an abstract number of specializations. So anytime I want to say this person is good at this thing above and beyond the basic skill set, like making Roadblock the expert chef that he is known to be, I make sure that he gets a specialization in French cuisine, and therefore when you're looking over a stat block and you see, he's the heavy machine gunner. He's super strong. He's super good at heavy machine guns, and he's really good at cooking. That if you don't know the character, gives you the insight into the character through the mechanics. And of course, any opportunity I get to add an example that is very characterful, and I try and avoid using just the same. I try and avoid using Duke and Snake Eyes in any of the examples. I try and go for deeper cuts, and then throw in a little trivia about the character to explain what they're doing in the situation and why that should be your favorite character right now.
Absolutely. And of course, the system, while there are pre-gens available of the more well-known characters in each of the systems, but primarily we'll stick with GI Joe for a moment, the way you can build your own that slots into the universe that these characters exist in is wonderful. I was going to say beautiful, it is, but wonderful is also a fair description. So
I'll take either. Thank you.
You can take both. I will willingly hand over both for my own pleasure and as a thank you for your creativity. What's special and something you've worked on more recently is the IPs I've mentioned and that you've mentioned: Power Rangers, GI Joe, Transformers, and the most recent. I will use stablemate as a pun there. My Little Pony is that they have the ability to cross connect because of the way the Essence 20 system has been created. And you actually worked on the guidance to help us as GMs sort of make that happen in a smooth way. So what was it like working on the field guide to action and adventure, which helps us mesh these worlds together?
Yeah, so not only am I one of the authors on the Field Guide to Action Adventure, I was kind of the project manager on it. I have a development credit on it, and I did the outline for what this book would be. But yeah, basically, we were told at the beginning to make all the games cross-compatible. We weren't told that this would ever be acknowledged in a product. We just thought it was going to be a selling point and something that, as a player picks up one Essence 20 book, another player will be like, oh, I know Essence 20 because I played these other Essence 20 games. So it was kind of a surprise for us when we were told, and now we're making the book that connects all three of the action adventure brands. We didn't bring My Little Pony into this one. maybe there'll be future field guides, and maybe My Little Pony will finally get to a seat at the table, the most fabulous of the seats. But for now, it is just Power Rangers, Transformers, and GI Joe. But what was interesting is that I accidentally became the best person to be the developer on this, because I was on the GI Joe team. Everyone that was brought on was on a single team. But then the Transformers book was considered not ready for print, and so it needed some refreshing, especially on the roles, which was our version of classes. And I was available, and so I became one of the few people that worked on both GI Joe and Transformers. And while I was doing that, I snuck in a feature that if you were playing a different game and you liked the Transformers roles better than your own game's roles. So, for example, if you like the Field Commander, which is the Transformers leader type, better than the officer in GI Joe, it was actually very easy to take out any of the giant transforming robots elements and make it a role for a military fantasy game. And I did this by the core of the role is kind of system neutral, and then it's the modular elements became the areas that are setting specific. Nobody asked me to do this. It was just, and I didn't tell anyone. This was just something I figured that if it ever came up on Discord, I could be like, hey, if you want these Transformers roles in your GI Joe or Power Rangers game, you just got to do a couple of these little swaps.
Yeah.
So I turned over Transformers and then got the instructions that we want this crossover book. And I was like, oh, I've secretly worked on this hidden feature that can now become the main selling point of this book. You can now be a GI Joe who is also a Transformer. And it's all because of this little modularity that I just kind of snuck in because I happen to work on roles for multiple core rulebooks. And so that should have been the most challenging thing about the field guide. And instead it became something that I already figured out. I just needed to write. And so once that got the ball rolling and we were figuring out what we could do with this crossover book, because that was also vague. We know that each of these brands has its own team at Hasbro that manages it and is very protective of their own brand. And so the idea that, like, if I wanted to do Megatron, but as one of Rita's monsters, like, am I allowed, or are the Transformers people going to smack my hand because they're worried that it's going to make him look subservient to another brand's main villain? So we kind of stepped gingerly. And then as we were getting away with things, as things got approved in the outline, we started to get a little bolder. And we ended up with a whole adventure where villains from all three adventures are teaming up, and a lot of like factions that are specifically, if you want to be a Transformer GI Joe, here is a faction that replaces Yo-Jo and For the Allspark, and you become the Earth Defense Force. And then we got the Transmorphers, which are if you want to be a Power Rangers Transformer, and the what's the last one? It was not the Battle Rangers. Anyway, there's one for GI Joe Power Rangers as well. Yeah, we just started like building up all of these different crossover elements, some of which are taken from established fiction because GI Joe and Transformers have crossed over before. But this is the first time Power Rangers has ever crossed over with Transformers or GI Joe in any official capacity, and we got to do that, and we got to establish a bunch of ideas of how these different elements would interact. How does the Morphin Grid interact with Energon? Things like that. It was super fun.
It sounds it, and I'm incredibly jealous because it sounds like such an amazing sort of universe to die. And I know the multiverse thing is everywhere, and it's potentially been overdone by certain things, but this has such a fresh take, but original in the fact that, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's so toy box. It is.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick out this, or I'm going to pick out this, and we're going to do that.
At the risk of upsetting the people that we were paying for the rights to make these games, it's kind of better than Toy Box. Because, like, growing up, if you wanted Snake Eyes to team up with Optimus Prime, Snake Eyes comes up to Optimus Prime's shoulder. He should not. He's supposed to be, like, Optimus is supposed to be towering over him. So because these have to follow a single rule, then it doesn't matter what scale the toys are in. They're all the same scale in Essence 20.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Brilliant. So pivoting slightly back in on ourselves, away from sort of sharing and spreading the proverbial love in that respect, back into the GI Joe core sort of universe. And we've had some fantastic releases: the core rule book, a few of the supplements, the GM screen, which comes with its own adventure. Operation Cold Iron is out there for purchase. But you've worked on something which sort of flips the script on its head and allows us to play the other side of the fight, the campaign with the Cobra Codex. Has having that shift to it sounds very Star Wars, the darker side, or the enemy or threat side, as they are in the game, allowed you to sort of explore into the other mythos and lore of the GI Joe universe.
Um, well, the weirdest part of that shift is that while I was writing Cobra Codex, I was also writing my sections of the My Little Pony core rulebook. And so that was a lot of strange days on Google looking up just things that should not be Googled together. But yeah, I with Cobra Codex, I had to look at it in like multiple different ways because I wanted to make sure it served its purpose of being, if you want to play Cobra, you can. But it had to make Cobra still be the villains of the entire setting. And so like it's filled with things like just a propaganda thing of them making a bunch of promises, and this is what, when you joined Cobra, that's what you wanted Cobra to be. And then other areas, it's very clear Cobra is using every single one of the soldiers, and so it kind of makes the soldiers sympathetic because that's the position that the PCs are going to be in. And by the end of it, I was like, oh, I think I might like a Cobra campaign more than a GI Joe campaign, because there's so much depth there. You can be either someone that's been taken advantage of, realize it, and then you're working for Cobra, but still looking for your out or looking for your way to rise through the ranks so that you can change things. Or you can be the one that's just tired of being taken advantage of, and you can't wait to rise through the ranks so that you could be the one rising, like taking advantage of other people, like going from bullied to bully. And yeah, it expresses himself naturally to what you would be doing between missions. It gives a lot of ideas of like the politics of Cobra and how you could be rising through the ranks. And that you and the PCs, you're not necessarily a squad as much as you are the ones that, you know, form the group. You hang out together in the Cobra, you know, the fields and whatnot, and you're the ones that are conspiring against everyone else in Cobra.
That's amazing. So, with that sort of rise to the top, stepping on others, and sort of getting ahead in one way, shape, or description, if you were to play in this sort of Cobra-based game, who would you pick as your mentor?
Oh, as my mentor. Okay. Ooh, I like Destro.
Ooh.
He's a little more honor bound, and it feels like you're gonna get a straightforward answer from Destro, whereas Cobra Commander will feed you, you know, he'll feed you the company line. He will convince you that he's listening, but he's not. And a Baroness will just tell you to shut your mouth. And most of the other Cobra High Command are mostly, they're in it for themselves. You don't want to get too close to Dr. Mindbender or you'll end up being experimented upon. But yeah, Destro is probably the one level head in all of Upper Cobra that I think I would trust and want to align myself with.
An interesting choice. And so you mentioned there Dr. Mindbender, and he has featured as part of the publicity campaign
Okay.
for the Worlds Collide. I'm pretty
Oh,
sure
yes.
he was on the artwork for the Worlds Collide. So what has the build up to the Worlds Collide event, which you have been heavily involved with and sort of built up towards. So what has that been like to sort of build this multi-table event?
Yeah, so Worlds Collide will be a mega event that Renegade is running one night at Gen Con, in which you can come with a Transformers, Power Rangers, or a G.I. Joe role-playing game character of 6th level, and you can just sit at a table of mixing up all the different settings, and all of you are working together to take out Lord Mindwaves, who is one part Dr. Mindbender, one part Lord Zed, and one part Shockwave. Just all three egomaniacal and like experimenters who just happen to, each in their own universe, be working with like some transdimensional energy, and it just crossed paths. It sucked a whole chunk of universe into one location and merged all three of them into one gigantic evil being. And so we've released the art of Lord Mindwaves, and I absolutely love it. It's a little bit of all of them. If you know all three settings, you can pick out which part goes with which character. And of course, with Dr. Mindbender, he's got his abs on display, which is very important for Cobra's lead scientist. So I wrote that adventure. I co-wrote it with, what is Michael's last name? All right, I'm going to have to apologize to Michael later. So I co-wrote the adventure. I'm the one that came up with the concept, And like I was saying, when we were doing the field guide, we were getting bolder and bolder. We didn't do anything this bold of actually making one character of all three of them. But at this point, I have done a few crossover adventures and different crossover content for Renegade. And I realized that Hasbro seems pretty cool with a lot of the ideas that we come up with. So this is the wildest that I've gone so far, and I am very happy that it's been approved.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing it all play out. That sounds weird to want worlds to collide and things to, but it sounds like it would be so fantastic. So if you are at Gen Con and do or want to get involved with a sixth level character from any of the worlds mentioned, then yeah, definitely go and get involved in that. And you mentioned there a lot of sort of cross content. So moving from the amalgamation that is a Lord Mindwave to the CobraCon Fusion that released relatively recently, available on the Renegade Games Studios website. Links in the description below. Plug, 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 plug. What has it been like to sort of put this sort of smaller content out for us to weave into our games in that?
Yeah, so that's the free RPG Day product that we put out. And I was contacted by Renegade and told that we were just making a GI Joe and Transformers crossover book, and was not given any other details beyond like the logistics of how long it had to be and whatnot. And so I got to build that from the ground up. And not long before this was announced, Hasbro had announced that they were doing for the first time GI Joe Transformer crossover toys. And so on the cover there, you see a Megatron that has a Hiss Tank alt mode. And so this is a toy that exists. This is something that had just come out and I was very excited about and had on pre-order at the time. And I was like, all right, if we're doing G.I. Joe Transformers, this Megatron has to be our main villain. And we can just put the art on the cover and it'll just draw people's eyes when they're at their friendly local game store looking through the free RPG Day options. And also around the same time, they'd announced that they were going to make Bumblebee as an Ostriker, which is a weirder mix because an Ostriker is largely a green car and it's a Jeep. And you would think someone like Hound, who was already a military guy, or Beachcomber, who was already a Jeep, they would have been the person to be the Ostriker. Bumblebee's the more popular character, so you hide all of his yellow as you transform him into this green Jeep. So yeah, I knew these elements existed. I knew that people would want to play with these toys in our setting. So I started writing an adventure around the idea that Cobra and Decepticons are working together. They are building a drone that is based on Megatron's chassis, and he can turn into a Hiss Tank. And I, as much as I would have loved to make it about Megatron himself, that would have made this a 20th level adventure, which, as an introductory adventure, that's a little high. So it's actually a 10th level adventure, which is also very high, but it's as low as I could justify a Hiss Tank Decepticon. And so because it's so high level and we can't expect people to just show up to free RPG Day with a 10th level Essence 20 character, we also included pre-gens, which includes the Bumblebee that turns into an Ostriker, and Bulkhead, who is another military-themed Autobot. Minerva is the one that rounds it out. She's a medical fly car. So while you want, like, if you're injured, you want the ambulance to be there, but an ambulance is slow. So a fly car is something that shows up with paramedics to treat you while you wait for the ambulance. So she's ended up being a really interesting character that I wasn't as familiar with, but she had a toy that had just come out. So I decided to use her as one of the Autobot characters. And then on the Joe side, you've got CoverGirl, who is a mechanic, Doc, who is a physician, and Mainframe, who is a computer specialist. And I figured the first scene would be you find Bumblebee. He is a mess. He has just lost a fight with the Decepticons. And the Bulkhead and Minerva need help putting him back together. So you've got these three Joes who happen to be very good at rebuilding both life and machines. And so they take his shattered normal body and they combine it with the Ostriker. So the first scene in this adventure is rebuilding one of the PCs. And the Bumblebee can help. Bumblebee, while on the operating table, can give pointers of like, that goes there. And he can also try and calm down Bulkhead, who's like feeling guilty because he's part of the reason that Bumblebee got messed up. So yeah, so you rebuild them and then you go as a team and exact revenge and stop this Cobra Decepticon union.
Amazing. Definitely when I'm picking up on completion of this interview. I do like the way you've described it there, that you don't remove player agency from Bumblebee just because they are in a critical or crisis situation, which is key to the experience of playing these games and why we enjoy them so much. So yeah, I just thought that was a great thing to pick out.
Well, player agency is my highest priority as a GM. And so
Mm.
it's carried over to my highest priority as an adventure designer, which means that there will be a lot of areas in my adventure that's like trying to deal with every eventuality or the most likely ones for how the PCs would want to approach it.
Mm.
And I try and present all the options in the most easy to digest way possible for the GM who is reading through it and understanding, where to go once you've got this branch point and the PCs are trying to figure out what their favorite direction is.
So we've touched on the crossovers from the various IPs mentioned within the Essence 20 system. I'd like to just shine a spotlight while we tail off on the military theme for a character that has come from a universe outside of the others and has made such an impact on the GI Joe world, as it were. I keep changing what we're using to describe it, but it's so many things to so many people. I think it's fair game, and that's Sergeant Slaughter and your work on how he is being brought to the forefront uh, in within the Essence 20 framework.
Yeah, Sergeant Slaughter is one of those things you kind of had to be there to understand because he was a celebrity pro wrestler who became like the first celebrity member of the GI Joe team. And then there was only a second celebrity member, which was William the Refrigerator Perry, a football player, before Hasbro gave up on the idea of these celebrity crossovers.
Mm.
So there's just these two little anomalies, one of which became the spokesperson for the show. He would introduce the show when it was come back. He did play a character on the show, but he wasn't the main character. It wasn't like the Jackie Chan adventures where it's all about Jackie Chan. This wasn't all
Mm.
about Sergeant Slaughter. He was a part of the ensemble. He would show up every fifth episode or so, just like the majority of the cast of this show with like hundreds of characters already by the
Mm.
second season. And, he stuck around for 3 or 4 years and then his contract ended. He went back to pro wrestling. But he feels so much like a GI Joe. He feels like such an
Mm.
important member of the team, and he was there during the height of the popularity of the brand, which was like right in the mid '80s, and played such an important role as the spokesperson because it felt like you're watching a cartoon, and then one of those cartoon characters is there in real life, telling you, we'll be right back to GI Joe. So Sergeant Slaughter is a really like the most important a footnote could ever be. And it was unfortunate that I didn't think we would ever be able to get a chance to bring him to Essence 20 because
Mm.
Hasbro doesn't own the character. He's owned by, Sergeant Slaughter, the pro wrestler. And there's even an allusion to him in the core rulebook where after it lists all of what I call the active roster, which is just like an excuse to talk about what's cool about 80 different GI Joes that GMs might want to include in their game.
Mm.
There's a sidebar saying like, well, where's my favorite Joe? Because 80 is narrowing it down by 2/3 of the entire roster of characters I could have included. And so
Mm.
I just kind of wanted to address like, look, yes, there's a lot of GI Joes. I couldn't include them all. I didn't want to just focus on any one couple of years. I wanted to do a couple of characters from each year.
Mm.
And then I also mentioned, and there's a couple of characters we can't use for boring legal reasons. We would have loved to, but we didn't want lawyers to send us home in a ditty bag, an itty bitty ditty bag, which is one of Sergeant Slaughter's lines from the animated movie, which is just he is amazing in, and some of my favorite Sergeant Slaughter moments are from that movie. Um, and then it ends up not only did Hasbro work out a deal that they would bring Sergeant Slaughter into the new toy line, the classified figures, the 6-inch GI Joes they're putting out right now,
Mm.
but then Essence 20 also got the right to bring him into the role playing game. But the problem was that it's a small window. It is once again a licensed agreement, and so we couldn't just put him in the next rulebook that came out because as soon as that license ends, suddenly we can't sell that rulebook anymore.
Yeah.
And it was decided Sergeant Slaughter is a big enough deal that he is going to be the subject of his own book or his own series of books, which was also going to come with everything Sergeant Slaughter related we could. So there's a Sergeant Slaughter plastic miniature, there's Sergeant Slaughter pawn, even though we haven't even announced that we're making other pawns for G.I. Joe. We just need to make sure that any plan we could ever have for the G.I. Joe
Yeah.
role playing game is in this one book.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that it's this came out before the Field Guide to Action and Adventure. Field Guide to Action and Adventure introduced things like contacts, which are ways that you can get really close with NPCs so that you can use the characters from the settings without them dominating with the PCs. Because, if you're hanging out with Snake Eyes, why isn't Snake Eyes doing everything? No matter what level you are, Snake Eyes is going to be better than you. But if it's just like, I'm really close with Snake Eyes, we really need Snake Eyes right now, that's when you call in a contact. So it introduced the idea of contacts. It introduced just different ways to present the game. And we wanted to use those rules in this box set. So suddenly we had to take rules that should have been introduced. All right, the timeline's a little weird. Field Guide was written before Sergeant Slaughter. Sergeant Slaughter came out before Field Guide because it was rushed so that we can get as much of the license. We can get it on the shelf for as long as we possibly were allowed to.
Of course, yeah.
So a bunch of options that we wanted to introduce into the game were introduced here. Oh, a faction. That was another thing that was introduced in Field Guide. So we've got these like mini previews of the next couple of years of Essence 20 products, all crammed into this one book so that we can do Sergeant Slaughter, like rules if you want to play a character that's like Sergeant Slaughter or inspired by Sergeant Slaughter. A threat stat block so that you can fight Sergeant Slaughter in like your Cobra campaign. 3 contacts depending on your relationship with Sergeant Slaughter. So Sergeant Slaughter shows up in multiple different ways as contact. The faction rules for Slaughter's Marauders, which is one of his 2 teams that he was in charge of in the toy line. And then we made contacts for all of the other Marauders. We've got pre-generated characters for all of the other Marauders. And then an adventure. Okay, so the adventure takes a little bit of explaining. In the cartoon, when they were making Serpentor, they kidnapped Sergeant Slaughter and they decided to use his DNA. Let me go back and explain Serpentor in case you don't know. Serpentor was Cobra's emperor. He was the clone of history's greatest leaders because the other Cobras were tired of Cobra Commander. They wanted new leadership. So while they were cloning Serpentor, they captured Sergeant Slaughter and they were like, well, let's just add his DNA to Serpentor. And so they extracted some Sergeant Slaughter DNA. They put it in like the DNA stew that was going to become Sergeant Slaughter. Cobra Commander, who was still around the base and did not want to be replaced, put like a chemical in there that would mess up the experiment. And so instead of getting Serpentor, they got this just giant monster. And he fights Sergeant Slaughter, and then eventually Sergeant Slaughter escapes in all the confusion. So we decided that we will use that monster. We'll call him the Slaughter Monster, and he is going to be the main fight at the end of this adventure. Because again, we are never going to be allowed to use it anywhere other than a Sergeant Slaughter product, so we had to put everything Sergeant Slaughter as we could into this one box. So yeah, the adventure is called Marauders versus the Slaughter Monster, and the idea is that Sergeant Slaughter's rival, Overlord, that is a whole other tangent I'm going to save you from. He challenges Sergeant Slaughter and the Marauders to come to what's called Coil Island, which is kind of like Discount Cobra Island, and it's run by Overlord, who is like Discount Cobra Commander. And so Sergeant Slaughter agrees to this challenge and decides that these PCs who he just saw really step up in a combat right before the challenge, they would be the next Marauders. And so he would send them off for Slaughter's Marauders training while he and the actual Marauders were preoccupied. And then they would go to Coil Island, they would infiltrate, and they would save the day. So that's where the PCs fit into this whole adventure that is otherwise entirely about Sergeant Slaughter.
That's a lot of work. That's amazing.
It was so much fun.
It sounds amazing. It does sound
well, because,
really...
like I said, when I was narrowing down the active roster in GI Joe, I had to go from 300 characters to 80. So now imagine narrowing down from 300 characters to 1, and like I just got to do absolutely everything I could. And there's only so many GI Joe characters that had enough meat on that bone that they could sustain a whole box set. Sergeant Slaughter just happened to be one of them.
Check it out. It's on the Renegade Games Studios website.
I should put it. So it's called the Sergeant Slaughter Limited Edition Accessory Pack. The accessories includes a whole source book dedicated to options and a whole second source book with an adventure. So on top of getting like pawns and miniatures and maps that go with the adventure, you're getting a whole bunch of new Essence 20 options.
If you pick it up, just check it out. It's on our website. I will put a link in the description below to the GI Joe specific stuff, but also the role-playing section of Renegade Game Studios, because we have very much dived into the GI Joe side of stuff. But as we mentioned earlier,
just getting started.
Exactly. But I want to do my due diligence and make sure we mention the other IP that you've been working very hard on that uses the Essence 20 framework, but has a different approach where from the action and adventure IPs we've mentioned with My Little Pony. And you mentioned sort of Googling things in tandem and parallel. And so what was it like going from guns blazing to mains flowing?
Well, one of the main things that I had to get used to was using exclamation points. Because as a writer, I was taught that if the tone of your sentence doesn't deliver on the expression, putting punctuation shouldn't make up for a weakly written sentence. Like it was drilled into me that exclamation points are bad. It's unprofessional. And so I rarely use them in my professional writing. But then the introduction for the My Little Pony rulebook is written in voice as Pinkie Pie, who is the most enthusiastic of all the ponies. And I just hit that exclamation point. Just shift one was all over the place for that. And I had to convince myself this is okay because it's Pinkie Pie.
And My Little Pony introduces elements that aren't necessarily found. While it works within the structure of the Essence 20 rule set, My Little Pony is in itself its own world with its own magic. Is that a fair expression?
So anytime that I'm approaching an Essence 20 book, I need to make sure that I am delivering for the audience. I'm delivering on the purpose of the book. And then as much as I can, I try and make sure that if you are an Essence 20 completist, that whenever you pick up a book, there is something that you can add to your game. So two of the main things that are added through the My Little Pony core rulebook is a magic system for the first time in Essence 20 and a really extended non-combat conflict resolution chapter that talks about just different ways that if you want to do an episode that is about one specific pony, like they're having an identity crisis or whatnot, you can just set up this one long skill challenge that goes the length of the adventure that works as like a subplot for the group, but becomes like a super focus on that one character. It's something that, the media that we are basing these games on, they all do it. GI Joe has featured episodes about a single character, like Transformers, Power Rangers, everybody. But most role-playing games don't because it's a group event. And I didn't want to say like, oh, if you want to do a single player-focused episode or adventure, then it's just that person gets that much more attention and everyone else is by the sideline. No, I suggested it as like, run the adventure and then run this little side thing that really explores what's going on with that person. Like just basically set up some conflicting conflicts, some additional conflicts that apply to them personally. Could be internal, it could be external, and just balance it and make sure that over the course of the campaign, everybody gets their featured episode. So we've got rules for that. We've got rules for a lot of non-combat challenges. And it ends up that My Little Pony might have the best GMing advice of any of the core rulebooks. It rivals the field guide, which is really secondarily a GM book for all of Essence 20.
So building on this sort of GM advice and these new systems and things, what has brought you the most joy to work on within the My Little Pony construct and the releases that are now available? Again, links, description. But what was brought you the most joy to work on and flesh out within that particular world?
So the magic system was really fun because I knew it would probably be the crunchiest thing in this book that I was instructed to make the least mechanically heavy of all of the rule books that we're working on. And so I needed to graft a magic system onto an engine that did not have a magic system yet. And so the idea I came up with was that instead of being a skill tied to an essence score like all of the other skills in the game, your deception is tied to your social, your athletics is tied to your strength. It would be its own skill that anytime you increased one of your other essence scores, you could move into it. And it felt like a very thematic choice there. And you see when the ponies are going to the magic schools, it is at the sacrifice of being able to go to the parties, which is why they're down for their social. It's at the expense of doing more physical activities, which is why their strength and speed go down. And so, it just becomes this independent skill that you have to make sacrifices to be good at. And I love tying story to mechanics. I love tying theme to mechanics. And so I thought that was a really fun choice. And then the other thing I did was that one of our penalty systems in the game is called downshifts. So if you were in a negative situation, you downshift. And so even if you have a D8 and a skill, if you're in a situation where you're getting a downshift, you'll be rolling a D6 because you're not in your optimal condition to be rolling that skill. And spellcasting is anytime you cast a spell, you downshift your spellcasting skill. So you cannot just be blasting your most powerful skill turn after turn because the skill will be weaker and eventually you will just exhaust yourself, and you have to wait because they only upshift once per turn. So you slowly start getting back into it. So again, it's crunchy as far as the My Little Pony standards go, but it's also a completely optional system that any player that wants to do anything magical, they can opt into it. And there are multiple levels you can opt into it. Just by playing a unicorn, you get a certain touch of magic, but that's basically all unicorns are in My Little Pony. They are the more magical, or the most magical of the pony species. So if you're choosing to be a unicorn, you are choosing to be a little bit magical. And then one of the roles is the element of magic, which is full on dedication to magic. The main thing you're going to be doing, you are a full caster wizard, basically. And so then you are so committed to magic that's why you are then learning a whole separate subsystem that doesn't apply to anybody else, because you are showing a commitment to this subsystem.
I've written magic attrition, but physical attrition through the use of magic, I think, is a wonderful way of, as you say, you can't just continually blast spell X or Y until ad infinitum, effectively. With the way I have experienced the SN20 system, it all helps keep moving the story forward. Actions have consequences one way or another, and as you say, with the shifts, that also sort of tailors the experience as the group, the party, whatever your construct of individuals are, sort of experience the ebb and flow of the world in which they are playing. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
just saying how I see it. Are you as familiar now with the My Little Pony roster as you are with the GI Joe roster?
I went into writing for My Little Pony fully aware of the entire cast of characters. It's something that when my wife was first pregnant, I watched a documentary about the Brony phenomenon, and it really made me really curious about what is this show that really caught on outside of its target market and really became a cultural phenomenon. My Little Pony Friendship and Magic came out the same time as GI Joe Renegades, which was if GI Joe was the A-Team, basically. It was a small cast of characters fighting Cobra if Cobra was Amazon. So it's the A-Team versus Amazon with a GI Joe and Cobra skin over it. And then it also came out at the same time as Transformers Energon. And both of those two shows just became like, oh yeah, one time there was this Renegade show and this Energon show. In fact, I'm only pretty sure, no, I don't think it was called Energon. I think I'm mixing up the names of the shows because as fun as it wasn't super important. Whereas my Friendship is Magic redefined My Little Pony. And it's the fourth generation of My Little Pony. And you don't get a fourth reboot that basically wipes the slate clean and becomes the primary version of the franchise that often. So after my wife had the baby and I needed to sometimes just watch something that I knew wouldn't upset the baby when I was trying to put her to sleep or just hang out with the baby, who are only so amusing. And so My Little Pony felt like a good show that I could watch while we were together, and ended up getting very much into the show. And I got the appeal. And there was a couple of moments in the first two episodes where it establishes who all these characters are. And it's a two-parter, the first two. And the first one kind of shows them all as the archetypal versions of these characters. You don't expect there to have a lot of depth. And then the second part of the two-parter kind of gives each one of them a moment to either be extra big into what you think they are. Pinkie Pie is as Pinkie Pie is no matter what. But then a character like Rarity, who came off as very superficial and fashion focused. At one point, she cuts off her own tail hair to get past a sea creature. And just the way it's shot and framed, you feel the sacrifice she's making because you know she really cares about the vanity of it, and that she has done something I didn't expect that character to do, and it made me respect the character more. And then as my daughter got older and we would watch it together, as kids do, she would ask why. Why is something happening? And what I loved is that I always had an answer why. And it was usually a long answer explaining well, here's the character's motivation. Here's what they're going from. Here's what they're going through. Here's what they're thinking but not saying. And for kids' entertainment, you don't usually get that. It's often why are they doing that? I don't know. I don't care. But My Little Pony is not like that. My Little Pony is a show with a lot of depth of characters. So, obviously, people that have seen my the room that I'm in, you don't post any kind of video, right?
I do not.
Okay, well, I'm surrounded by GI
maybe
Joes
a
right now.
maybe a future project, but at the
Okay.
moment. But
Well,
your
yeah, like if you could see me, then to my left is like a $300 Sky Striker. Behind me is a vintage Terror Drome that is really hard to complete. Hanging from the wall is my sleeping bag from my youth, which features the 1987 cast of Joes. I am very clearly dedicated to GI Joe. And so when I was brought on, and when I was pitching myself to Renegade, I made it clear, like, I'm your GI Joe guy. And it was decided, even though Renegade got the 4 licenses when Essence 20 was being developed, it was decided that the focus would be on Power Rangers, GI Joe, Transformers would be like 1, 2, 3. Like, actually, I think they were all supposed to come out the same Gen Con, and then because of COVID, that was changed to in the new year, we'll do January, February, March, or January, March, May. We'll do 1 core rulebook each. And then we'll worry about My Little Pony. And so after I turned over for G.I. Joe and they said, like, what would you like to work on next? I said, the My Little Pony book. Like, I know this stuff. And I talked about how I would use Essence 20 to run the My Little Pony game, which I don't think is super intuitive from a design point of view, because I think most people at that point saw Essence 20 as really good for these action brands with a combat focus. And while I constantly have to remind people that every season of My Little Pony starts and ends with a fight scene, combat is a thing in My Little Pony. It's not a thing guaranteed in every episode, unlike the action brands. So combat still needed to be part of the system, but other conflict resolution also had to be in there. And yeah, so I think I surprised Renegade with this hidden My Little Pony passion and knowledge that the reason that I even worked on My Little Pony and Cobra at the same time was because well, they really wanted me on Cobra because I had established my credentials for G.I. Joe, and they wanted to keep a timeline, and so someone had to be working on Cobra at the time. And usually they would only give one assignment at a time, but because I was clearly their G.I. Joe guy, and now apparently I was their My Little Pony guy, they let me do 2 major projects at the same time.
That's a fantastic burden to have by the sounds of it. So if people are interested, and rightly so, the artwork is fantastic, as it is in each of the titles individually. The artwork is spot on and really draws you into that particular universe, and then with the field guide sort of allows you to sort of cross with the other 3 out of 4 for ease of explanation.
And the field guide has some of my favorite art because we had to invent scenarios where Power Rangers was crossing over with the other brands. G.I. Joe and Transformers, we can draw on existing art from comic books and whatnot, but we had to just come up with scenes of like Rita Repulsa is interacting with what's his name? There's an Autobot double agent, Punch Counterpunch. So he is both an Autobot and a Decepticon, but he's really Punch, the Autobot, but he pretends to be Counterpunch, a Decepticon. And there's a picture of him talking with Lady J as Punch, like obviously coordinating the scene. And then there's a shot of him talking to Rita Repulsa as Counterpunch. And it's kind of like he's back to back in the art, so it really like frames how the toy gimmick worked. And Rita Repulsa just has this look of like, what? Like she does not buy this guy's gimmick at all.
Yeah. No, but that is where was I going? That's available.
I don't know. You something about art.
Just how great it is. But someone drawn. That was where I was going. So someone drawn in by the artwork of the My Little Pony world. We've spoken what's available currently for G.I. Joe. What is currently and potentially available in the future or coming soon for the My Little Pony sort of stream of releases under Essence 20?
All right. So as with most Essence 20 books, there is the core rulebook, and then there's the fancy edition, the premium edition, special edition. Anyway, so there's a regular version of the core rulebook, and then there's one with an alternate cover. And in the case of My Little Pony alternate cover, it's a pink cover with a like a sparkling purple version of Twilight Sparkle's cutie mark on it, which is also the cover of the journal, which is just like take a character sheet and just expand it across a whole book so that as you're playing through your adventure, you can write everything that this pony has been going through. You can talk all about their friends, if they have a day job in Ponyville, like just what they've been doing across Equestria. So those 3 products are currently available. So the core rulebook, the fancy version of the core rulebook, and the character journal, as well as a set of dice that I am told looks much better in person than it does in photographs. So in photographs, it just looks like each one is a different color of the rainbow. But the reaction that I tend to see when people get their copy of the dice is they're so sparkly. So yeah, apparently the cameras didn't quite capture that. So you've got the My Little Pony dice set, a My Little Pony dice bag, and then you've got a GM screen, which, as is traditional with the Renegade releases for Essence 20, the GM screen comes with an adventure, and in this case, it's called In a Jam, which is an adventure that I didn't really co-write it. I picked it up. Another author had started it, couldn't complete it, and so I did about 2/3 of it, working a little bit off of their draft and a little bit off of their outline. So that is available right now. That was really fun to write because I didn't write the adventure that came in the core rulebook, but I find that even as a designer, you'll learn a system so much better when you write an adventure for it, because you start seeing the areas that you need to explain within an adventure because the core rulebook might not cover it. And then, that becomes something that I put a pin in. That's like, if I ever get a chance to revisit this in a future core rulebook, or not a future, well, yeah, sometimes a future core rulebook or just a supplemental source book, that's material that I should revisit. So In a Jam is available, and I believe that's it for currently available for My Little Pony. Let me just go to the Renegade store and see if there's anything obvious that I'm missing.
I think you've caught it all, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, well, you can download a fillable PDF of the character sheet.
Always a useful resource.
Yeah.
And there are PDFs for each of the IP's Essence 20 character sheets with the 4S structure, as sort of alluded to earlier. But My Little Pony in the future, where what's on the horizon in that respect?
So, as has become the tradition, the first supplement after the GM screen for all the rulebooks is what's called an adventure series. So GI Joe has Operation Cold Iron. Power Rangers has Adventures in not Adventures in Equestria, Adventures in Angel Grove. And Transformers, I can never remember that. Something like Nick of Time, but it's not Nick of Time.
Space and Time?
No, that doesn't sound right.
No, it's something like that.
Yeah, anyway, it's not important. All that's important is that each one gets a hardcover with an adventure. Normally, the adventures are divided into 4 adventures, but the Dark Skies over Equestria is divided into 6 individual adventures. And this comes with a whole bunch of player-focused options at the beginning of it, including a new origin. So one thing that we knew was kind of taking a gamble with My Little Pony is that we only had 3 origins in it. So all of the other games have 6 to 10 origins right out of the core rulebook. My Little Pony only has the 3. You can be a Pegasus, you can be a unicorn, or you can be what's called an Earth Pony, which is the more traditional looking pony. And the reason that we narrowed down the number of basically species of ponies that you can play, well, there were a couple of reasons. One of them is that we needed room for the magic system, which is something that not any of the other core rulebooks had to find space for. And then the other thing is that there's no obvious 4th origin we could have included. Once you go to 4, it's really 5 different ancestries are tied for which one could have been the next one to introduce. And I say that before I say that the 4th one we're introducing is changelings. But as the show went on, it expanded the roster of mythical creatures beyond just ponies, and then you started seeing griffins, hippogriffs, changelings, and there's at least one other thing. And dragons were becoming regular characters. Oh, and yaks, which is not a mythical creature, but the way they appear on My Little Pony is kind of mythical. So the first of those secondary ancestries that showed up a lot in My Little Pony is the changelings, and so you get a changeling origin in here, as well as perks related to shapeshifting, which are not exclusive to the changeling. Changelings are better at shapeshifting, but unicorns and other magical ponies also have the ability to shapeshift if they're taking these perks. And so there's also some spells, some new influences, all of which are written with changelings in mind, but not exclusive to changelings. And then the adventure, the 6-part adventure, is all changeling themes. And so not only are you getting the new options, but you're also exploring the world of the changelings, including the changeling villains that we saw in the series.
Amazing. So, I mean, we've covered so much in a relatively short space of time. Everything from the establishment of yourself within the industry, the genesis of the Essence 20 system, and how it's split and come back together across these 4 IPs, and releases that you've worked on for each. It's I've lacked in my due diligence, and I would like to ask the question now, Ryan, of where can we find and support you online and across the wider internet?
So if you're looking for me specifically, you can find me on Facebook. That's still primarily my social media of choice, although I lurk more than I interact. But if you interact with me, I will tend to interact back. So yeah, facebook.com/kd.Ryan Costello. The KD stands for No Direction, which is my podcast network. So if you want to check that out, you can go to nodirectionpodcast.com, where just about every day of the week we update a new podcast that is either a news podcast or an actual play, mostly related to Pathfinder Second Edition. We've still got some Starfinder content, although unfortunately our producer of Starfinder content recently had surgery and he has had to step back from how much he can contribute to the site. But we also have Essence 20 coverage there. It's currently just the one podcast. It's called The Upshift, or just Upshift. And myself and Jason Keeley, who was a developer at Renegade, he was working full time for them. Whereas as much as I've just been talking about all the things I've done for Renegade, I am still technically just a freelancer for them. But Jason was a full timer. And so I could talk about the genesis of a lot of these products, the writing on them, and then I hand them off to him. And he tells me about how they went in the direction that they did. And all of the products that we talked about, except for the My Little Pony line, he had a hand in the development of. And so if you want to get any insight into like deeper insight into the making of any of the products we've been talking about, or different specific rules aspects, like we did a whole episode on languages, you can check out Upshift. I intend to also bring a blog to Essence 20. So the blog originally, my concept was called GI Joe, and it was about doing 3 different versions of a concept. So either I'm going to make Snake Eyes, I'm going to show you 3 different ways you can build Snake Eyes, or I'm going to do a medic. So here's Doc, Lifeline, and Stretcher, 3 of the established characters to do that medic concept and just to show how to deliver it. But first of all, it got delayed because I was so busy writing Essence 20 stuff for Renegade. But then second of all, when we made the Sergeant Slaughter book and we had those sections on like how to build the Slaughter's Marauders, like how to build Slaughter's Marauders Lowlight, how to build Barbecue, Spirit, Mutt, Junkyard, and Footloose, and Sergeant Slaughter himself, that was the blog. And so I realized I can't do a blog where I'm just giving away the stuff for free, because that might be something that Renegade wants in a product. And so not only could I be paid for it, Renegade might be mad they can't charge somebody for it.
Yeah.
So I've changed the concept of the blog where I'll be using all of Essence 20 to do a pop culture character. And I know I'll definitely be starting with Batman.
Nice.
And this is a character I will never have to stat up for Essence 20 unless we get the DC license. Who knows? But to the best of my knowledge, we will not be having to stat up Batman officially anytime soon. So so now it'll be characters that are not related to the IPs, but will be using the mechanics introduced in the Essence 20 game. And I'll just be going over like, this is the most obvious role. These are probably some other roles that I could have chosen, and here's why I did or didn't. I'll tell you that the second character I'm going to do is Richard the Warlock from Looking for Group, because for those who don't know, I am the writer of Looking for Group at the moment. So Looking for Group, or LFG, is a web comic that has been going on for 17 years. It was started by Ryan Somer and Lar D'Souza. We are probably most famous for a music video that came out 15 years ago called Slaughter Your World, which is a parody of Part of Your World, in which Richard the Warlock is going around and just killing all the innocents in a village and singing about it. And so that gives you an idea of the tone of the comic book. And so as kind of some cross-promotion, I will be, and also to show the extent of what you can do with Essence 20 and bringing magic from My Little Pony to options that aren't in My Little Pony to create this Warlock character. He's the one that I've got earmarked for my second character. Which was my way of segueing into just talking about what I've been doing for my day job, because I'm not a full-time freelancer. This is a second job, and running the network is volunteer work. So my other job is with Laughing Dragon Studios. It is an animation studio. And if you go to any of the Laughing Dragon social media, primarily TikTok, you can see a bunch of our original shorts featuring our mascot characters. These are all basically little ads we do to get work within the industry. And like the most obvious thing that I could point to and say that what we've done, we did the animated sequences for Disenchanted, which is the sequel to Enchanted that's on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
So we did the 2D animated sequences for there, and we also, if you're familiar with Central Park on Apple TV, which is by the same creators of Bob's Burgers, we have done the musical sequences there. So basically, every episode will have a musical sequence, and they hire us to basically do an animated music video for them. But yeah, if you just go to our social media, you can get a bunch of fun little videos. One I recently did was called, actually, they don't really have titles, but it starts with Andy, our Griffin, walking around and getting chucked at by life's basically giving Andy too many lemons. And it's an inspirational little thing about how, you don't deserve the lemons. And making lemonade is not as easy as the expression has you believe.
I will make sure there are links to your socials, No Direction, Laughing Dragon, and other things you mentioned down in the description below. So please scroll down, follow those links, go and support Ryan's work in any and every capacity where possible, be that through officially licensed release products from the Renegade Games studios or the podcast within the network, the forthcoming blog. When you mentioned about creating characters, Batman is iconic. One I was thinking in the back of my mind, which sort of leans in GI Joe, but I'd love to see how you did it, is the Spriggan, the Netflix anime series. The main character Yuo Minae has a
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, it's just not everybody's seen everything, and it was just a character that came to mind. But it's it's a action / combat based character that I think could be done with Essence 20 pretty easily, but I'd love to see somebody else's take on it before I completely ruined it and and all that sort of good stuff.
Well, the reason that we're starting with Batman is because the network has a tradition called the Batman test. And so whenever we were talking about, say, a Pathfinder class, we would have a segment in the podcast saying, like, so how is this class like Batman? If you wanted to build Batman using this class exclusively, and then we would just kind of geek out about different minutiae of Batman lore and try and make whatever logical connections we could.
I don't know how you do what you do. It's always very good. Batman test underline. Yeah, so there's plenty of me to go and pick up and purchase and enjoy just for my own. So if you listening have been inspired or intrigued or whatever, please, as I said, scroll down, follow those links, and support Ryan and the IPs and Renegade and No Direction Network and Laughing Dragon Studios and all the rest where possible, please. Ryan, it's been a real pleasure, and there's so much more coming in the future of Essence 20.
Yeah.
I'd love to get, being a recurring guest, I hope you would love to come back and join me many more times in the future.
Especially because you are accommodating of my time zone. We are in very different parts of the world, and you go out of your way to stay up late or to get up super early to have me on. So I really appreciate that. As someone who has scheduled interviews on the other side of it, I know just how much of a pain that can be.
Well, you make every chance we get to interact a real joy, and so it's always a pleasure to sort of compromise is the wrong word, but organize things between us in that respect. So thank you, Ryan, once again for joining me on the podcast. It's as always a real pleasure.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the show, then go to www.snydersreturn.squarespace.com. Alternatively, you can find us over on Twitter @ReturnSnyder. We have a Linktree link in the description of this episode. And if you want to support us, come and join us over on Patreon, and we also have a Discord server. Please leave us a review, because we'd love to learn how to improve the channel and provide better content out for those who are listening. Until we speak again, thank you.